On the night of October 7th, 1688, a pottery skull fell out of the second-floor window of Prague Castle. It shattered on the stone slab of the courtyard, and a thick, dark red mass resembling blood oozed out. No guard dared to pick up the shards. Half an hour later, the same solution appeared on the doorstep of the alchemist Mikkel Sendevoy's office. Later, it turned out that the liquid contained lead, arsenic, and human blood. From that day on, candles were lit in the chambers of Rudolf II, even during the day. The Holy Roman Emperor, once the patron of the arts, astronomy, and philosophy, never left his bedroom again. Documents were brought on a silver tray wrapped in canvas. Rudolf would not let the metal touch his skin. In a letter to his brother Matthias, he wrote, "They put poison in the silver. I can feel it crawling under my fingernails." The letter was sealed with wax with flecks of ash. According to the apothecary, this wax was used only for ritual locks. The first symptoms are recorded in the diary of the palace physician Franz Huber. His Majesty complains of itching between the fingers and in the groin, accompanied by the odor of rotten copper. At night, there is sweat, so corrosive that it burns the linen sheets. At the same time, the convulsions began. The seizures lasted from 3 to 9 minutes, sometimes with foaming at the mouth. After each one, Rudolf demanded that the mirror be taken out of the room and the jambs nailed shut. He screamed that he was being watched through the mirror eye and that it transmitted his thoughts to Würzburg. The windows in the bedroom were sealed with parchment. The floor was covered with the skins of lambs, supposedly sacrificed for the purification of blood. The emperor took only food sanctified simultaneously by a priest and a Jewish Kabbalist. All meat was cooked in a solution of ash and wine. The healer in a report wrote, "The food is tasteless, but he eats greedily, as if he was afraid to starve to death if he touched the bread." Rudolf's skin began to change color. Le guérisseur écrit dans un rapport, "La nourriture est insipide, mais il mange avec avidité, comme s'il avait peur de mourir de faim s'il touchait au pain." La peau de Rudolf commence à changer de couleur. A servant who saw the shirtless body swore under oath, "This is not skin, it's rotten paper. It rustles when he moves." There were rumors that the emperor had been eaten by alchemists. In an inn on Charles Street, an ear was sold for 5 groschen. It was passed off as Rudolf's own ear, claiming that it had fallen off from rot. The city was buzzing. During the night, from the house of Franz Huber, someone stole 2 vials with samples of the emperor's blood. In the morning, a charcoal inscription appeared on the wall of his house. "He is dead, but he lives as long as you feed him the potion." At the council in November, the first words about the transfer of power were spoken, but Rudolf refused to sign the documents. That day, he scratched a nail on the wall of his room with the phrase, "The empire will not die in silver. The empire will burn in glass." This inscription was covered up, but later it came through the plaster again. The temperature in his chambers was kept below 10 degrees. The emperor refused to have a fireplace. He used to say, "The flames call for a shadow, and the shadow is already under my bed." He slept in a chair, wrapped in a cloak, soaked in ointments and blood. One of the servants who cleaned the chair died 2 days later. His throat swollen, his eyes red, his body covered with scales. In December, Rudolf stopped getting up. His urine turned black. His feces became watery with ashes. His eyes became cloudy. His tongue cracked. One of the documents describes, "He speaks, but the words don't come out, only sound, like stone on bone." At the same time, the alchemist Marek from Lodz put forward a theory that the emperor was poisoned by a solution of silver mixed with arsenic. He demanded an autopsy, but access to the chambers was forbidden. The guards were doubled. Anxiety grew in the palace. One of the maids, Magdalena, disappeared. It was rumored that Rudolf had locked her in the cellar to feed on her breath. The monk's notes say, "He is rotting, but he demands life. He cries out to the saints he himself has brought down." The candles at his bedside were changed 6 times a day. A dark liquid appeared on the floor, and no one could tell where it was coming from. By early January, none of the courtiers dared to stay with him for more than 5 minutes. In the apothecary's diary, "I am forced to smear my face with grease before visiting. The odor burns the nostrils. Under his fingernails, it is green and the nails come off." Rudolf, however, refused to recognize the end. He was still trying to sign the papers. His hand trembled. Ink flowed down the parchment. Sometimes he put a cross, sometimes just a drop of blood. On the day before Epiphany, a cat ran out of his chambers. Its fur was torn out, its eyes were dead. The emperor claimed it was a messenger of Johann D, an English sorcerer, with whom he had long ago broken off contact. At night, all the mirrors were brought out again. He demanded to be read psalms and alchemical formulas intermingled. In a spy's report from Bavaria, "The whole palace is in a stupor. It is rotting alive, and everyone is waiting, either for a miracle or for death." No more orders came out of his hands. The body was decomposing, but the heart was still beating. By January 8th, 1699, no more sheets had been changed in Rudolf's chambers. At each attempt, the cloth tore under his hands, leaving a viscous substance on his fingers that absorbed pus, sweat, and tar residue. Huber recorded, "He's not sweating, he's oozing. It's not body fluid, it's something else. It's as if there's something brewing inside him that's striving to get out." Opening the window, a vapor formed in the room and slowly dripped down the glass, leaving oily traces. The emperor no longer spoke intelligibly. He uttered curt phrases, sometimes in an unfamiliar language. One of the monks, summoned for absolution, left the chambers in a panic, claiming he was reading forbidden formulas. "I heard names in them that should not be heard by the living." When questioned, the monk added, his lips were bloody, but not from sores. He had torn them himself with his teeth. From that moment, all the clerks at court were replaced. The order was not given by Rudolf himself, but by Chancellor Lenzel, who feared that any leakage would cause a riot in the city. The replaced men were placed under house arrest. One of them soon died of a strange ailment. His skin turned grey, dark fluid came from his ears, and he stopped responding to speech. In the alchemical laboratory at the Rud, an emergency inspection of all vessels was carried out. By order of Prince Matthias, who had arrived in Prague under the pretext of diplomatic affairs, but was actually preparing for the transfer of power, all powders and essences stored without an inventory were confiscated. Among them was a vial with a green precipitate, which began to foam on contact with the air. Its origin could not be established. Meanwhile, the emperor's body began to deteriorate not only internally, but externally as well. A swelling appeared on his right thigh, which became a festering tumor. After 3 days, the skin in that area ruptured, and about 2 bowls of thick, yellow-grey liquid leaked out from there. In an attempt to lavage, the tissue split further, exposing part of the femur bone. Huber is on record as saying, "This can't be the result of disease alone. There is interference here. Something has been eating him up from the inside for years." Amid the deterioration of his condition, rumors of a curse intensified. People began gathering at the gates of St. Thomas's Monastery, demanding prayers for the city's deliverance. Several women claimed that at night they heard sounds like growling from an empty furnace in the Grad area. One of them was credited with the prophecy, "His blood will become salt, and salt will become flame, and the flames will purify the capital." Rudolf, though barely moving, retained his awareness. In rare moments of enlightenment, he demanded paper. He tried to scribble something, but his fingers were crooked. The inkwell found afterward contained not ink, but ground charcoal mixed with bee fat. A fragment of paper preserved the words, "They went through gold, but found silver. I was silver. Now I am mercury." By the end of January, the emperor's heart was beating unevenly. Sometimes the pulse disappeared for a few seconds. The skin on his chest had become thin, bluish yellow, and the veins were clearly visible. When he was rubbed with vinegar, it came off in flakes. A servant, having dropped a piece of bandage, could not pick it up without a glove. It was warm, as from the body, but the cloth moved as if something were inside. This claim was not confirmed. But after the incident, access to the body was again restricted. One alchemist, Sebastian Mach, proposed a desperate method, using a mixture of mercury and gold in vaporized form to purify the body and draw out the poison from within. The attempt was made. For an hour, Rudolf lay in a room filled with thick vapor. After that, his body temperature rose sharply, his breathing became hoarse, and thick smoke came from his mouth. 12 hours later, he fell into a coma. Matthias, fearing the imminent end of his brother, gathered a council of 6 confidants. Closed agreements were signed for the division of powers. The Duchy of Austria passed under the direct control of Matthias. The Spanish envoy, Padilla, left a note. "He is still breathing, but the state is already divided. Even if he survives, there will be no power." These papers were kept in the caches of St. Vitus Cathedral. At the same time, there was panic in alchemical circles. One of the disciples started a rumor that one of the ingredients used for the imperial potion was made from the ashes of a burned heretic. 2 men were found hanged in the casemates with no signs of struggle. 3 books were burned in the cellars. Their contents were never made public. Rudolf himself was between life and death at this time. His body was already almost unresponsive. Only sometimes his fingers clenched convulsively. From his nose and ears came a trickle of blood. His eyes were closed, but his eyelids twitched. The lips were chapped. An attempt to administer a decoction of frankincense and sandalwood failed. The apothecary noted, "The flesh refuses to absorb. The body does not want treatment." The last entry is recorded on January 29th. He is still alive, but there is no one in him. This was recorded by the monk's apprentice standing at the door. That night, several people heard something fall in the room, but no one came in. Only in the morning did the guards see that the candles at the entrance were melted to the ground. One of them had glazed over in a shape resembling a human profile. In early February, Rudolf's body stopped giving off heat. A servant, who was changing the linen, noticed that the skin on his back had turned grey, as if covered with ashes. An attempt to turn the emperor over caused a cracking sound. The fabric of his back was stuck to the bed and separated with it. After that, the decision to completely immobilize him was made without discussion. He was no longer touched unless absolutely necessary. The skin under his eyes burst, revealing a vascular meshwork. The monks on duty at the chambers recorded in a report to the Chancellor, "The Lord seems to have removed the countenance of man from him." The alchemist Sebastian Mach left Prague without awaiting trial. It was rumored that he took with him a certain folio that described an experiment that led to the state of the emperor. The book was never found, but the archives of the underground laboratory were burned by order of the council. Beginning on February 6th, guards were posted in the corridor outside the chambers, wearing loincloths dipped in tar. They were told not to speak to each other or look at the door. One night, one of them saw a thin shadow slip out from under the curtain, human, but with an extended neck. He died 3 days later of fever. Before he died, he was delirious, saying he is no longer alone. A doctor's examination through a slit in the door showed that the emperor's eyes were closed, but moving under the eyelids. A swelling had formed on his abdomen, beneath which gases were palpable. When one of the healers tried to pierce it with a needle, a stream of dark liquidus with a pungent odor of saltpeter escaped from the hole. Those present left the room. 3 fell ill. 1 lost his sense of smell forever. Meanwhile, the presence of the secret police, who had been given new powers, was increasing in the capital. The order read, "Anyone spreading rumors of the emperor's death will be executed without trial." It didn't help. Ensuite, la décision de l'immobiliser complètement est prise sans discussion. On ne le touche plus qu'en cas d'absolue nécessité. La peau sous ses yeux a éclaté, laissant apparaître un filet vasculaire. The latter, seeing Rudolf's condition, refused to give a written opinion. Orally, he said, "The heart does not beat, but shrinks like a rolled-up cloth. The lungs do not breathe, but emit putrefaction." In his opinion, were it not for the warmth retained in the region of the neck, death might have been pronounced. In a secret letter to the Emperor of the Holy Office from Councillor von Zollern, it was stated, "There is a fear that the body continues to exist at the expense of a force that has no nature. No known disease leads to such a long and agonizing decay without cessation of respiration." The letter was intercepted. Its author was found hanging from a door hinge. In Prague itself, spontaneous fires broke out. 3 houses in the Malastrana neighborhood burned down overnight. People blamed it on a fire bursting from the heart of the dead. The chapel of St. Nicholas was covered with black cloth. The services stopped. The priest said, "To pray is to call him alive, and he is no longer with us." By February 19th, the emperor's hands had fallen off. They were dry, the hands sagging. The skin on his elbows had cracked. One of the bandages removed from his body bore an imprint, not a blood stain, but a yellow image that resembled a human face. The monk who saw it threw himself into the river. His body was never found, ever. A debate began among Matthias's cronies, whether to continue to support the body or to prepare for a public transition of power. No decision was made. No doctor or priest dared to sign the death certificate. The body was breathing, weakly, intermittently, but it breathed. Toward the end of the month, The emperor's teeth began to fall out. One of them, stuck in a bandage, was given to an alchemist for analysis. It was found to contain traces of silver. This gave rise to Nenchuguyo fears that the metals implanted in his jaw were the result of experiments designed not to cure, but to prolong suffering. The further was derived from the analysis. In the room where the emperor was, the odor became unbearable. It penetrated the walls, impregnated the furniture, the tapestries were removed, burned. The charcoal couldn't cope. The smoke barely masked the stench. The doctors started whispering when they came in. One of them suggested injecting Rudolf's lungs with a powder made from crushed frankincense and snake bones. After the procedure, the emperor stopped moving altogether. But he was still breathing. This was recorded by a guard. He put a quill to his lips, and it trembled. It happened during the night. In the morning, it was discovered that the guard himself had gone blind. His pupils had turned white. When questioned, he stated, "I looked him in the face, but he didn't." The doors to Rudolf's quarters were no longer open, even for the doctors. On the 5th day after the last attempt at dressing, one of the warders said through the bishop, "If we open it again, not a man will come out, but what's left of his shadow." This was kept in the Chancery archives under the label unverified. The warden himself disappeared. His body stopped breathing, but his heart continued to contract. The beats were rare, 2 or 3 in a quarter of an hour. The monk Augustine, putting his hand to his chest, said, "It is not a beating. It is an echo." He was immediately dismissed. A week later, he was found outside the city with his throat cut. On a nearby wall, "He is everywhere," was written in charcoal. Inside the chambers, decomposition had reached the bones. The lumbar region had separated from the pelvis. One of the doctors reported in a whisper that the emperor is decaying, but not dying. The skin was ulcerated with ligaments showing through. Bandages were no longer used, replaced by wax plates applied to the crumbling parts of the body. The servants, who changed at the door, did not stay longer than 2 days. After that, they were taken away with fever, hallucinations, vomiting. One cried out that he saw the emperor sitting on the ceiling. Another convinced the guards that small insects were coming out of Rudolf's mouth. They were all isolated. Some were executed for contamination by superstition. Matthias, who was in Brunn, sent a new order to Prague: bring out the body, establish the death, begin preparation for the transfer of power. There was no reply. The delegation, which arrived at the head of his trusted magister, was allowed only to the outer part of the palace. They were not allowed into the corridor leading to the emperor's chambers. Rudolf's chancellor, Hermann von Hirschberg, had not left his room for 6 days. According to those close to him, he had refused food, claiming that he smelled death in every piece of bread. His body was found in his study, with his hands unclasped and a burnt sheet of paper next to him that barely read, "It's not him." Spontaneous prayer services began in the streets of Prague. People, not receiving the news, gathered in silence, holding candles in their hands. Some burned alchemical treatises supposedly found in cellars. The church refused to recognize them as authentic, but the city didn't care. Fear had replaced faith. One of the surviving scribes, in a report sent to Würzburg, noted, "No one says emperor anymore, only he. The voice, the sound, the ashes. He is feared. He cannot be buried. He cannot be called alive." This letter was the last official mention of the name Rudolf until the day of his recognized death. There was an incident inside the palace. Part of the ceiling collapsed over the altar room. The builders refused to fix it. One of them said, "This is a sign. The wood is rotting because the throne rots under those who do not die." The laborers were replaced with prisoners. 3 escaped. One died of burns from contact with an unknown substance found under the fresco. An attempt to embalm the body again failed. When the body was opened, black vapor escaped from the peritoneal cavity, causing one of the assistants to go blind. Another fainted. The report based on the examination contained only one phrase: unable to describe. There were no signatures. The sheet was found in an empty envelope. Meanwhile, in Vienna, a plan to bring troops into Prague was being discussed. A direct invasion was rejected. There was a danger of an uprising. Instead, it was decided to wait. Some members of the council suggested setting fire to the entire palace. Others suggested summoning the papal legate. No compromise was reached. Rudolf remained alive. At the very end of the month, a man came out of the door of the emperor's chambers. No one recognized him. He wore Rudolf's robe, but his face was distorted, as if in soot. He walked silently through the gallery and disappeared into the east wing. The next night, the shelter that housed the last witnesses to the imperial attacks burned down in the city. Of the 6 men, only one survived, but he had lost his memory. The next day, a herald announced, "The emperor is ill, but he's keeping his spirits up." No one believed it. A riot broke out when the door to the chambers was opened by force on the morning of the 11th. There was no one inside. The bed was empty. The wax on the floor had melted, as if someone had made a fire. There were prints left on the wall, not fingerprints, but as if the marks of palms covered with sores on the inside. According to the guards, the room was silent, but the walls were humming. Rudolf's body was found 2 hours later in the cellar, beneath the alchemical laboratory. He was lying on his back, arms crossed, eyes open. But the skull was partially destroyed. The temporal bone was gone. A physician from Brunn, who arrived with the commission, recorded in a report, "None of the organs retained their shape. The liver is black. The heart is like coal. The blood is motionless, without color. The body was carried in 3 layers of cloth, soaked in vinegar, tar, and ash. Even through these layers, you could smell the odor." The guards walked in silence. The priest refused to recite a prayer. He only said, "May all that remains in these ashes leave these ashes." He was later forbidden to say Mass. When the body was taken to the tomb, it was not placed in the coffin. The coffin could not bear the weight and odor. It was decided to bury it in a stone niche without rites. Several bishops did not show up. The ambassador from Spain left before the end of the ceremony, claiming to be ill. The papal legate refused to recognize the burial as canonical. The next day, he was recalled to Rome. According to the scribe Johannes Schultz, who kept copies of all the orders, that day, many things disappeared. Orders, seals, signatures. People spoke not of death, but of what had died with him: faith, science, law. Spontaneous bonfires began in the city. Treatises, mirrors, alchemical vessels were burned. Inscriptions appeared on the walls. "He has awakened. The silver has rotted. Do not touch the ashes." The funeral was not officially announced. In the archives, There was a note, and the date of death is not specified for reasons of stability. But Matthias was already preparing a military interference. He ordered his troops to approach Prague and camp across the river. The city awaited the siege. Meanwhile, inside the palace, the devastation began. Servants were disappearing. Laboratories were being burned out. One of the monks was found hanged in the Hall of Cards, leaving a sheet with him. He gave me his tongue. I could not keep silent. In his mouth was found a piece of parchment with symbols that could not be deciphered. They were handed over to Vienna, where they were burned off the record. Rudolf's last days were rumored to be without writing or speaking, but he left scratches on the marble slab near his bed. 7 lines, each ending in a dot. Some of the remaining alchemists at court claimed it was the sign of a completed circle, a seal forbidding entry. They were arrested and sent to Tyrol. One died on the way, the other disappeared. On the day of the official proclamation of death, all the bells of Prague fell silent. They were not rung, not out of respect, but out of fear. Many people were convinced that sound could bring back what had gone missing. Notes circulated in the streets. Silver doesn't rot, it infects. Rudolf's name was forbidden to be mentioned at Mass. His image was removed from coins. Portraits were burned. Anything that could remind you of him was removed. Even memories were considered contagious. The chronicler Augustin von Leuven wrote in a private note, "We live in a void, scorched without a body, but with its trace on our breath. Death has not produced peace. It became a void that was feared to be filled." Matthias's power was silently acknowledged, but more and more often in the reports, the words fatigue, trembling, uncertainty. The empire had a new ruler, but it was not rid of the past. Since the day Rudolf's body was buried without a name, not once had a bell rung over Prague. Even in the spring, when the cherry blossoms bloomed, the streets remained empty. In the street churches, services were held with closed doors. The priests were silent during the liturgy, only raising their hands for fear of words. Emperor Matthias entered the city through a side gate. No fanfare, no musicians. He did not touch the throne. Orders were given from a room in a monastery on the outskirts. The official explanation was repairing the hall, but reports said he refuses to enter where the walls remember the dead man's breath. According to documents drawn up in Vienna, it was decided to erase all of Rudolf's correspondence, except for acts relating to foreign trade. The archives in Prague were emptied. The alchemical formulas were collected in boxes, doused with tar, and burned in St. Joseph's Square. The crowd did not applaud. No one came out. Only the children watched from behind the shutters as the flames engulfed the symbols. One of the last letters, sent before Rudolf's death, contained the phrase, "Do not open the iron box." What the box was is unknown. The archivist Wolfgang Grunwald, mentioned in the document, was found dead in a well. His body was not buried but burned without rites. Inside his pocket was found a sheet with incomprehensible stains. One of the servants later confessed under torture, "It's a mercury mark. He wanted to breathe as the dead breathed." Spontaneous disappearances began in Prague. Those who served Rudolf directly disappeared. The first to disappear was the gardener, then one of the apothecaries, later 3 from the alchemical circle. No trace was ever found. It was said that the bodies themselves went into the walls. They started drawing signs on the castle cellars, chalk, charcoal, then blood. No one cleaned them up. They just covered them with curtains. The chronicler Friedrich Lang, who left the court, wrote in a private note, "The empire no longer prays. It no longer has anything to pray with. All words have been absorbed into stone. All symbols have rotted away." In the universities, classes in natural philosophy were discontinued. Professors were questioned. One of them later disappeared. A phrase scratched on the glass in his office. He knew that silver does not purify, but attracts. The Pope issued a special bull on silence. It was forbidden to mention alchemy, even in sermons. Those who violated it were sent to Teutonic monasteries, where no correspondence was allowed. But the rumors didn't disappear. Letters from Poland reported that black smoke from burned ashes brought disease to the east. In Switzerland, mirrors began to be burned. In Frankfurt, they stopped minting silver coins. Inside the empire, there was a stupor. Matthias, despite his power, became a figurehead. Orders were signed without a seal. Servants were afraid to go near the seals kept in Rudolf's former office. One of them later gouged his eyes out. His last order, "I saw a shadow moving on the metal." The throne on which Rudolf sat was shrouded in iron and taken into the dungeon. No one dared to touch it. The metal from it was considered defiled. It wasn't even smelted. They put it in a sarcophagus and poured lime over it. The empire no longer sang hymns. Music was considered too lively. Even military parades were held in silence. Anything resembling sensuality was considered hostile. Alchemy was declared heresy, but people whispered more and more in the markets, "The silver inside is not gone. It's rotting away." At the end of the year 608, an epidemic broke out in Prague, an unknown fever. It wasn't directly transmitted, but it killed quickly. Bodies bloated, eyes blackened, fingernails falling off, marks protruded from their foreheads, like the symbols in Rudolf's notes. It was then that they first spoke, not of a disease, but of a curse. One of the last living alchemists who fled to Krakow wrote, "He is not dead. He passed into metals, into stone, into dreams." He was caught. He died in his cell of asphyxiation. The official story was that he died by his own hand. But a null was found on the wall, not from inside, but from outside. And when the new emperor arrived in Prague a decade later, he did not enter the castle. He drove past. His motorcade didn't even slow down. He didn't stop at the cathedral or the palace. The palace. And the palace stood, empty, boarded up, inside which, according to some, still smelled of sulfur and vinegar. And so ended the age of Rudolf II. No ringing, no victory, no forgiveness. The time of silver rotted away, and from within, the rot slowly crept into the throne, into the city, into the people. He was the last to try to call light by the name of God and darkness by a formula. He died before realizing that he had invented not immortality, but contagion.